All right, welcome back to another episode of the Jacob Johnston Show. On this episode, I'm not going to make the entire episode about the coronavirus. Sorry, there's just so much that I can actually take, with coronavirus, going through, flooding every aspect of the news. So I worked really hard, even maybe going back to some social issues in order to give some analysis here of other issues that are going on, that have slipped us in the past because of the whole coronavirus and things that are going on right now that is unnoticed. Now, there will be a couple of things in this episode that go about the coronavirus because there has been some interesting analysis and opinion pieces. Now, remember, I said opinion pieces, so these are not news. And then there's some things that are news related. So I'm going to kind of stack, coronavirus, in the middle and try to just briefly touch on it, and then go through some more analysis. But I do have other things on here that are non-coronavirus related. So if you're looking to escape, the nonstop, coronavirus, here we go. Now, one little note here. Some of you notice that I do have, issues with eye contact with the camera. Now, I know that you are supposed to keep good eye contact and be very professional about it, like what you see on the media and the TV, and all that. But, this is my show, so I kind of want to bring you into this a little bit. So, I got a computer here, that displays, some of the slideshows that you see with the bricks, and as well as, notes over, some of the things I want to make sure that I cover or get out and explain. I got a time clock over here, that I kind of glance at from time to time to see how well I'm doing. And then I also have to make sure, over here, to keep track, make sure everything's going good with the computer. So I'm kind of breaking down, the wall here to kind of see, how everything's set up. And of course, this is a green screen. I believe I covered that. So in any event, non-coronavirus related news starting off. And so, as you know here, the New York Times, before the whole coronavirus epidemic hit the United States, hard, came out with this whole 1619 project. And I touched on this briefly before, but the 1619 project develops the premises that the colonists fought the Revolutionary War not for independence from England, but specifically to protect the practice of slavery in America. All right, and they go off and talk about the first enslaved Africans arrived in the New World in 1619. Now, this is one of those, despicable pieces by the fake news, the New York Slimes and all that, where they're trying to rewrite history a little bit, because that's what they're missing out of this is that the first actual slave owner in the United States, in the colonies, now 1619 was before the Revolutionary War by about 150 years, right? But, they're trying to go through and, develop this premise. Now, the first actual slave owner in the United States was a black man, actually, and who took his indentured servants to court and, got a ruling that because they tried to violate their contract in some way, that they were forever his property. And thus the institution of slavery was solidified within the United States and all that. And they go through in the 1619 project, and they've rewritten, slavery, and because slavery was not actually just white people enslaving black people. There were a lot of black slave owners and a lot of white slaves. But the media has censored and edited, not just the media, but the left wing has censored, edited, and rewritten history that a lot of the true history that goes along with it, goes off and gets unnoticed. You could take a look at the Irish slave trade, for instance. So we go through here and we have to ask ourselves, why was the New York Times trying to do this? Especially, considering that historians have come out and widely condemned this as completely and totally inaccurate and full of a bunch of fake, information. Well, part of it is because they're the New York Slimes and they just can't help themselves. They're a bunch of hacks trying to pretend like they're journalists or, intellectuals when they're a bunch of dimwits. But another part of it is because they have noticed that during the Trump administration, support for Republicans in the black community has been rising. Because, one of the things that the left has done in rewriting history is gone off to, dupe the black community. Remember, it was the Democrats that fought to protect the institution of slavery. It was the Democrats that instituted all the segregation laws. It was the Democrats that founded the KKK. It was the Democrats that opposed the civil rights movement. Now, the Democrats have tried to go off and claim, well, that was actually the Republicans because, there was this whole Southern strategy thing, and, the parties just switched, right? The Democrats became Republicans, and the Republicans became Democrats, and so you got to reverse the history. Which is a very lazy excuse, but they keep pushing this crap, even though there is no basis to support it. But in any event, what they have noticed is that, all their calls of shouting that everything, by Republicans is racist, and, the Republicans want to put you back in chains, as Joe Biden, infamously said back in the 2012 election, and, going through, all of this. Now we have, a Republican, president who's actually following conservative values in a lot of ways. Now, a lot of that is now being tossed out the window due to coronavirus, but, in a lot of ways has gone through and implemented a lot of conservative values. And what's happened? Up until the coronavirus, the economy was skyrocketing, black unemployment at historic lows. The black community was actually starting to gain financial independence. And the New York Times and the Democrats, they can't have this. They can't have this because they are so dependent on needing it around 90 to 95% of the black vote in order to stay in power. So what they did is they had to go through and try and, once again, have an edit to history in order to try and mentally re-enslave the black community. To go off and go, hey, if things don't go your way, it's because of white supremacy. If life isn't handed to you on the silver platter, it's all because of white supremacy. Republicans are racist. And look, it's been this way since the founding. You see, it's been this way since the founding. And guess what? Because it's been this way since the founding, that means the Constitution was written by a bunch of white supremacists. So really, the institutional racism within America's institutions, which is pretty funny considering Democrats control most of America's bureaucratic institutions. People don't seem to put a whole lot of thought into that. But because of that, America's founding was evil. So what we need to do is throw everything out and create a brand new constitution and a brand new founding with the principles of socialism. Yeah, that's it, socialism. And so it's in part, the reason why they did this whole disgusting, 1619 project was, one, so that they can try and gain, an uprising support, to overthrow the Constitution. And that's part of their get rid of all of our, constitutional rights for an authoritarian government. But they're going to claim that it's all about expanding freedom, expanding, individual liberty by having a government with so much power as to control every aspect of your life. But it will bring social justice, whatever social justice means. They never really defined a whole lot of their terms. And so plus, they just, the Democrats are all about needing to keep the black community in this victimhood mentality, to be able to try and keep them down, tell them, you can't get anywhere. Everything's against you. There's no reason for you to even bother trying, to raise yourself up and go after your dreams because everything is against you. Right? And this New York Times 1619 project was quickly adopted by, some school systems and very left-leaning states to go through and push this propaganda because, propaganda and indoctrination has to start at a very young age. Well, a lot of historians have come out saying, this thing is complete crap. Very little, if anything, is true in this. For instance, you're talking about 150 years before the founding fathers were even born. You could take a look at, the records that were kept from the Constitutional Convention and all that, and there was a lot of, argument, by a lot of our founding fathers trying to abolish and get rid of slavery. The problem is they were unable to, get rid of slavery because they had to make a decision, and that is whether to try and, keep all the colonies, into one government, in order to have enough, bodies, enough, armed people in order to stave off an invasion in case the English come back and try to invade. Because if we split, what would happen? Well, the English may have gone through and say, hey, you know what? You're two nations now. We're going to go to this nation, go, you know what? We're going to leave you alone. We just want this land up here. And then, they would be able to go through and conquer that. And then after that, go back through and reconquer, the nation that they were lying to, saying that, they would leave them alone. So, the idea was, okay, in order to try and, keep a united front, we won't abolish slavery, with the expectation that as time goes on, because, slavery was already starting to become unpopular, that as time would go on, future generations would be able to go back and, do what they could not themselves accomplish, right? And, note that, the United States was at, among the forefront of ending slavery. We fought an entire civil war, against one another, right? In order to try and abolish slavery. And slavery itself, was not as widespread as they want you to believe. I mean, when you take a look at, the population data that we have, first of all, half the slave owners were black, so it's not just, white people enslaving black people, but as we go through and, we take a look at that, the number of people who actually own slaves, and this is not an excuse or saying it wasn't that bad, because it was a horrible institution, and it was a huge moral stain that on the founding of this country that we could not abolish that. But, as far as, percentage wise, right, as horrible as it is, it wasn't nearly as widespread. It wasn't everybody in the South had a slave. We were talking, the slave owners were the bourgeoisie, who today would be the celebrities and the media and political elite, right? The average person couldn't, in any way, shape, or form even afford it, even if they actually if they had any support for it. So anyways, after historians had come out and had gone through and did a lot of fact checking, the New York Times had to go through and they snuck in a sly minor correction, to this, where they had to go, well, this is, actually more of an opinion piece, based off of a perspective, and not actually, to be taken as factual, indisputable, historic, fact. And so they had to go through and make a small clarification that instead of saying, in order to try and save face, what they did is they just changed the issue of saying, that it was founded in order to protect the institution of slavery. They had to go back and make a correction to say, no, some of the founders, only, some of them, not all of them, some of them, it's just that, there was, and okay, so that some of the founders would be, probably correct now that they've gone through to make that edit. But the entire premise that the nation was based off of, the institution of slavery, white supremacy, and therefore everything is horrible and must be tossed out. They're tired of having to live on. They're tired of democracy because they can't enforce their will on everybody, which makes you wonder, what is the left's will on all of this, right? What is the left's, ultimate, goal? Because when you go through and you take a look at the left, you realize they can't even get along with each other most of the time, right? They have this huge issue whereby they're constantly attacking each other for not being woke enough. So I wonder what their idea of an actual government is, because so far, based off of every policy, presented by their political leaders, they would tank the United States pretty quickly. So this whole 1619 project was all about trying to re-indoctrinate, the black community that is starting to leave, the Democrat Party, seeing, what the real difference is, and, trying to go off and create an indoctrination to raise on, to ensure that the next generation coming out of the black community, is indoctrinated with the victimhood mentality and demanding massive government welfare and socialism state, rather than having them realize, hey, this whole Republican thing of individualism where, you go out and based off of your results, off of your own talent and everything, you determine your own level of success and you get to keep a lot of what you earned rather than the government taking it all. So that is, one of the things that has gone on there, with the 1619 project and how they have gone through, and keep trying to rewrite and re-edit history in order to stoke, hatred and all of that into the black community. And, they've even had to redefine racism in order to get away with this, rather than it being its regular definition of one race having a particular bias towards another race based only on their race. They also had to include this whole power structure so they can promote the idea that they can be as racist and as hateful as they want to be, and they can't be called racist because, power structure or whatever. They're always trying to redefine everything so that they can act, in the horrible, disgusting way in which they try to accuse other people. Okay, so now trying to go on here and take a look at, some other issues. This is where I get, to some of the things going on with the coronavirus. I will try to just kind of get through this briefly. But Breitbart is reporting, CNN is baffled leftists won't listen to President Nazi Russian spy, our Nazi liar Russian spy, to social distance. I mean, this is one of those, things where, CNN and the rest of America's fake news media have literally spent 4 days engaging in deliberate campaigns to undermine Donald Trump by smearing him as a serial liar, racist, Manchurian candidate who sexually abuses women. And now this very same media is baffled over why the countless leftists are not taking the president's warning seriously about the coronavirus. And this goes through and talks about a lot of the dangers that the, conservatives have been, sounding the alarm about regarding the media, how they're constantly pushing fake news, misinformation, propaganda, and going through and making everything about politics and every day is, the end of the world. If you cry wolf all the time, no one's going to believe you when a real wolf actually shows up. And so now we're in a situation where, we need everybody to take the coronavirus very seriously. And nobody's doing so because, the, social distancing and, self-quarantining and, trying to, everyone just kind of isolate yourself for a while is coming from the president. And the left has been taught that anything Trump says, do the opposite. Because Trump's only wanting you to do it because it's racist. Trump is only wanting to do it because he's a misogynist. Trump's only wanting you to do this because, it's going to hurt the economy and benefit Russia, right? That's what they're going through. And so, the left is deciding that they're going to completely ignore President Trump and do the exact opposite of anything he says, right? And define it. And the media is baffled that after they, have told everybody, you can't believe anything the president says, and has run all this fake news that no one actually believes them when they're now trying to say, hey, we need to do our social distancing for a while. Throughout this entire, coronavirus, conservatives have been proven right on just about every social issue and about everything that we were warning the country regarding the dangers of. From having all of our manufacturing overseas, the Second Amendment, which I'll get to more about that, here later on after the coronavirus, part of the show. And, we've been going off, about the dangers of fake news and propaganda and misinformation. And we've been going through that. And time again throughout this coronavirus, everything that we have been warning about has come or is coming to fruition. Having a hard time speaking there, but it is coming about. It is becoming true. And what the left has, been trying to say and claim and all that, it's all failing. In fact, the entire pandemic is a failure of the left's, mighty must bow down to, state, our federal, national, and international bureaucracies, right? From the failures of the WHO, who bowed down to China and helping to downplay and cover this up for as long as they did, to, various other countries with large bureaucracies, going through, okay, this can't be that bad, so we're not going to, shut down travel, to, so much, even through here in the United States. One of the issues with the testing kits, is, well, we'll get to that. That's in the next spot. But, there's just been a complete breakdown. And as we go through all of this, the left, the media, the Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, the Democrats have all failed the leadership test massively during this coronavirus, outbreak. And so it's, just one of those things where it's like, I don't want to, do this in the middle of a national crisis, but it's kind of one of those things where, conservatives are kind of going, we told you so. Now, another interesting thing here that is going on, and this is having some people think, a little bit differently, in analyzing how the media is covering everything and, engaging in such, partisan, political, attacks and, going through everything. But one thing that really is standing out is after years of bemoaning that Trump is some authoritarian dictator, stripping our rights, stripping our freedoms, that he is just like Hitler, he's just like Stalin. Well, the media, what are they going through and criticizing him for as they go through their partisan attacks, their, deceptively edited videos, their, constant, hackery night after night, trying to turn this into a campaign, attack, is that they're criticizing him now for not being an authoritarian. I will say that, this was sparked when I was listening to Andrew Klavan from the Andrew Klavan Show. And he made this point that, the left, is going off and saying, we hate Trump because he's an authoritarian. Coronavirus comes by. Trump is not being enough of an authoritarian. He needs to, mandatory, lockdown, send out the military to force people to stay inside. He needs to, declare martial law. But Trump isn't going, declaring martial law. Trump isn't deploying the military to force people to stay in their homes and so on and so forth. So, what's up with, a lot of this shift from where they were attacking him as being an authoritarian to now they're attacking him for not being an authoritarian. And there's been some analysis that is going on along with some statistical models that has been very interesting. But first, let's go through and take a look at a clip here that came out of Lou Dobbs from Fox News, and we're going to go through and analyze this just a little bit.
Saying fluid samples were taken from the man's lung December 24th, 3 days. The laboratory had a genome sequence for most of the virus and told the hospital they believe the driver had a new coronavirus similar to SARS, but new to mankind. Again, by December 27th, there was knowledge in China about the virus wreaking havoc on the world and global economy. As word started to spread around the medical community in Wuhan, some doctors alerted others using Chinese social messaging, the app WeChat. One of those doctors, Li Wenliang, was threatened by the Communist Chinese government before mysteriously contracting the virus and then dying as a result of it last month. The Chinese government waited until December 31st before they alerted the World Health Organization to cases of the new respiratory disease. China's National Health Commission put a gag order on hospitals and laboratories January 3rd, telling laboratories to hand over any biological samples that they had taken or to destroy them. Those orders, however, came too late to stop a shipment of biological samples making their way by train from Wuhan to a doctor at Shanghai University. His team created the genome sequence for the virus and publicly shared that sequencing. The university's health lab was then shut down the next day for rectification, as the government called it. If it weren't for that shipment making its way to Shanghai, we may never have had critical information needed for the world to start on a vaccine and therapeutics for the Wuhan virus.
Okay, so some people are going off and, wanting to develop, some conspiracy theories, wondering about how the virus or disease has, mutated from being something that normally only infects animals but not contagious to humans to being contagious to humans. And part of that, conspiracy theory has been talking about, well, what did China do in their lab? Because they have noticed that the area of Wuhan is where its major, bio facilities are, and that's where it broke out. And the conspiracy theory goes, they were, manipulating or, testing the, virus, manipulating it, and then it broke containment, and that's how it got out. Whether they were doing it for medical research or trying to engineer a bioweapon. Now, from that clip, that doesn't support, that theory is not supported by that clip. Okay. In fact, I can't find anything that, truly supports that theory at this time. What it's saying is they found somebody, who was already infected, and they were studying that infection. And throughout that study, they shipped it by train over, to another city. You can go back to the clip to get the exact name. I'm horrible with names. And that they were able to get the, sequence and all of that. And that may have allowed us to try and get, and work on a vaccine and all that sooner. But the question still is, how did it, get out? And we could talk about the mishandling, the missteps, the completely botched, containment of it. But we were talking about a new, disease, for which we had no information on how it would affect human, how it would spread human to human, and so there was a lot of going back and forth, a little bit, on the seriousness of this new disease. Now, as far as I can tell, the most reasonable, explanation for how this had spread or how this mutated was bat soup, considering that this virus is, according to some scientists, genetically, appears to be, like the one that you would see in bats. But Part of what delayed the response and shows, the utter failure of the so-called experts that fill both national and international bureaucracies was this particular tweet from the World Health Organization that sends out saying that preliminary investigations conducted by Chinese authority have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus. Now, this was tweeted out on January 14th of 2020. Now, that's a tweet that does not age well. And we can go through and see that these so-called experts, are they really, experts? And the complete failure of all these bureaucracies as this has gone out and spread like wildfire throughout the entire world. Now, another reason why some people are going off trying to think that China was trying to engineer a biological weapon is because they're trying to accuse that this was engineered by the United States and unleashed upon China. They're trying to do everything that they can to scapegoat and avoid taking responsibility for their own incompetencies. And part of what's fueling that theory is because, as you notice a lot with leftist regimes, leftist governments, or even leftists here in the United States, unable to take responsibility for the results of their own actions and decisions, they always try to project upon their political, opposites the very disgusting actions, behaviors that they themselves commit. And so people are saying, well, if China's going on trying to say this was a biologically engineered weapon, by the United States, then the truth is more likely that it is China that, biologically was engineering a weapon and mishap, incompetence, and, it broke containment. Again, I do not, go through and subscribe to the whole biological engineered, weapon, thing. Now, another thing that people are noticing, or have been noticing in the media for the past few weeks is all the propaganda, all the fake news, or now their attack on calling it the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus. And they're trying to silence that, by trying to say it's racist, right? First of all, China is not a race. Chinese is not a race. It's a country. It's a geographical location. Now, it has a lot of Asian population, but Asians are, all over the place, Japan, North and South Korea, and, the list goes on, and inside of China, well, there's more than just Asians inside of there. There's Black Chinese nationals, Caucasian Chinese nationals, Hispanic Chinese nationals. It's a multiracial country, just like pretty much the entire world at this particular point. But trying to say it's racist by pointing out the geographical location of where it comes from is just plain asinine and stupid. And, it is asinine and stupid to say a geographical location is a race. The left, they just go on and on trying to shout down everything they don't want to hear as racist without any regard to whether or not it actually meets the definition of racist, by what meaning that they apply that term to things that have nothing to do with race. So they want to go through here, but we see them trying to do this, and a large part of that is because the Chinese government is flexing their muscle and threatening to boot out these journalists and so-called news organizations from their country. And they're more concerned about losing access to a market of about 1.5 billion people than they are about truthful, accurate information. So now they're trying to go off and they're siding with the Chinese Communist government and trying to attack President Trump and try to force us to stop acknowledging where this virus originated from. Because the one thing that China does not want to do is take responsibility for their own mishandling of this entire situation, or the fact that their own culture, and how they were experimenting with new and exotic, foods may have led to, this virus mutating and now becoming infectious to humans. But, one of the interesting analysis that I've seen about this disinformation campaign and how the media is focusing all of its coverage on politics, political attacks, and, political correctness censorship, is people are starting to wonder, what does the media know that we do not know, right? What does the media know? Is this being overhyped? Is this being, overblown because they're setting something up, whereby, if Trump doesn't react enough, they can come back and say, Trump is a horrible president. He doesn't, take things seriously. He put the nation at, risk, right? But they figure, well, maybe that won't, dislodge all the Trump supporters and all that, so they go, and a lot of people may downplay it. So maybe instead they've taken the idea of hyping it up and constantly attacking him as not doing enough so that he will overreact so much that the damage that is caused by the overreaction is what's going to dislodge Trump supporters, and then therefore have the Democrats retake, the White House, the House, and the Senate. The over politicization and political correctness that they are trying to go through, because the Democrats, they may be wrong about everything. They may be disgusting, vile partisans, but generally they're not stupid, right? Generally, especially during an election year, they're not stupid. They may be horrible, disgusting, and vile with their ideology, but they're usually politically savvy. And so you got to wonder, why is it that they're attacking all of Trump's, actions, as xenophobic, as, his statements are racist and all of that, if this is going to come back to bite them, because, people will see Trump as the leader that we needed, wanted, and were glad to have during a mass pandemic. And so there was an analysis done asking the question, are we overreacting and are we overhyping the dangers of the coronavirus? Now, this is not journalism right here. This is just me talking about an opinion piece that I wrote. So this is not my own personal view here. So I'm not downplaying it. I'm just, going through and taking a look at a lot of things. And I'm finding some things interesting as they go through and they talk about, statistics and the statistical modelings. And I found this opinion piece, interesting, especially when you talk about how the media and the Democrats, who are usually politically smarter than what they are, that their reaction is maybe not about Trump derangement syndrome and, being complete and total disgraces, but rather it's a deliberate overhype, by the media, while the Democrats, candidates can claim that, Trump's, actions are wholly uncalled for the politics of saying, oh, he overblew this, and because of that, inability to have a measured response, he did all this damage to the economy, And so as we're going through here, what it was saying in its statistical modeling was that, one of the biggest problems we've had about how to determine how the appropriate response to the virus is, this is new. We have no prior information. We have a lack of information, and so we're overexerting an abundance of caution. But our abundance of caution has a lot of negative consequences and damages. So it started going through and taking a look at this as, all the models are based off of the idea that this is has a 1%, death rate, and all of that is based off of the only, controlled environment case that we have, which was a cruise ship of 700 people where 7 people died, 10%. No, actually that would be more like 1%. Yeah, 1%. Sorry, 1%. And let me do, make sure I got that correction. I meant 1%, not 10%. there was 10%, 1% is 10% deadlier than the flu. But they started going off and realizing that, hey, the demographics of this, ship, was a lot more like Italy, where it was full of the passengers who were high-risk people, elderly people who had compromised immune system due to issues that come about with age. And goes, now that the virus has been spreading, we realize that the death rate overall, is coming down. But we still don't have full accurate data and information because of the lack of testing kits available to test absolutely everybody. And so with the lack of testing kits, we are only able to try and track everything by confirmed cases. What is the death rate of confirmed cases? But we have no idea how many unconfirmed cases there are because of the lack of testing and test kits. And therefore, there are potentially a far greater and significant number of people who have become infected, just had mild symptoms that, really didn't feel a whole lot different to them than, say, the seasonal cold and flu. It was just kind of mild symptoms. They stayed home for a few days, slept it off, got over it, and now they're back out there. We don't know how many that is. Right? And so, we just have a lot of problems here where we don't have all the information we need. But as time is going on and we're starting to collect data, it's starting to question if we're overreacting. Now, we won't know until we know, which is to say, we can't predict the future. We can't predict whether or not this opinion article and the statistical modeling that comes out and says this actually may be less dangerous than the flu. We won't know if that's the case or if this is, in fact, more dangerous than the flu until after we get past this epidemic and we're able to analyze what the total impact and results were. But even at that, we'll never have full information because of the lack of testing kits. So we don't know how many people actually caught it, slept, stayed home for a few days like they would with any other normal cold and flu, got over it, and just went right back about their day. We'll never know that number, right? But out of the people that, we were able to confirm, we would be able to see, and be able to kind of predict, the death rate. And then as time goes on, if this becomes, something no different than the seasonal flu, we'll be able to get, more accurate information on just how deadly this is. But I thought that was interesting, talking about the lack of information and if this is causing an overreaction, and if maybe the media and the Democrats, the way they're reacting, if maybe they've already gone through and analyzed this, and therefore now they are doing this partisan attack in order to goat the president into taking as extreme measures as possible so that they can come back and say his overreaction and unmeasured response damaged, yada, yada, yada. So that was interesting. Now, going forward here, the media has gone through and pushed out another series of fake news. But in this case, Joe Biden, who is just a chronic serial liar, pushed out a lot of misinformation during his debate with Bernie Sanders. So let's take a look at that for a moment. On last Sunday night's debate, Democrat presidential contender Joe Biden blatantly lied to the American public about the Trump administration's handling of the coronavirus testing in a pathetic attempt to push the false narrative that the lack of testing has endangered Americans. What he tries to claim is that the World Health Organization offered the testing kits that they had available, and to give it to us, Biden proclaimed, we refused it. We didn't want to buy them, is what he was saying. But Biden's claim was false on many fronts, and had previously been debunked at least 2 times prior. First, during the March 7, 2020 press briefing, Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar and Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Stephen Holm made clear that there were no World Health Organization testing kits. The testing kits weren't from the World Health Organization. It was from a private or government, run company, or I believe it was more of a private, testing company and facility over in Germany. He further corrected the press's misunderstanding of the WHO rumor. A German lab, the FDA had explained, had developed a recipe protocol for a lab-developed test. WHO took that and put that information out. That's what, it's often been called misleading. The WHO test, and that they added, they also got the CDC recipe and also put that out. Again, correcting some of the misunderstandings, noting that it was not WHO, but actually a company in Germany that had developed the COVID-19 test. Further explaining, the CDC was developing the test, at the same time, and that it had already been approved by the FDA, while the German test, had we gotten them, would have needed to go back through the bureaucracy of the FDA for the approval process. So what had actually happened was this German organization had stated that, hey, we got this test, yada, yada, yada. They informed the WHO. WHO then informed other people, hey, there's, these testing kits. But our own CDC had already developed, a testing kit and, was getting the FDA approval. And had we bought the German testing kits, we would have had to restart the FDA approval process on those testing kits, which would have actually had the result of delaying the availability of the testing kits going through FDA guidelines. So we've gone through and we've debunked that. Now, going through here and taking a look at some of the good news is that initial results are coming out. Now, this is just preliminary. This isn't, good news. We got the cure, and it turns out, that the cure that seems promising is a drug that's been around for 50 years and abundantly available. So it goes, malaria drug seems promising signs as future coronavirus treatment. It goes on here. Now, the issue at hand here is the low sample size of, the test group for this. So additional testing will be needed. But researchers and virologists in France have completed a clinical trial study studying the effects of, I can't pronounce that. If you want to know what the name of the drug is, you're going to have to go to the YouTube channel and, read it for yourself. But they used it, this drug is used to treat arthritis, malaria, and other ailments on patients and they tried it with patients with COVID-19. Researchers treated a total of 26 coronavirus patients with the drug, including 6 that were given the antibiotic, whatever that name is. The researcher released their findings in a study published on Wednesday. The results showed that all 6 patients treated with the hydroxychloroquine and, whatever that was, tested negative for the virus after 6 days. So there was like 100% recovery rate off of the patients, that used this. However, like I said, it's a low sample size. That, we're talking about 6 out of 6. That's not enough of a sample size, but it's enough to show that maybe we're headed in the right direction. Of the 20 treated with just, one of them, it was like 57.1% after 6 days. And if they just used the, in the control group, 12.5%, of the control group that made up of 16 other patients tested negative after 6 days. So, all in all here, what this is saying is that, there's some promising signs. We just need more research and data. Another promising sign, as being reported by Newsweek, is that injecting blood from recovered coronavirus patients into newly infected could slow down the spread of the disease. This is the idea of taking someone who's already recovered and developed, an immunity, and then, through blood transfusions, being able to share the, the immunity, going through, your, immune system, being able to do that. And Johns Hopkins and, just going through the names, state that COVID-19 has the potential to affect billions of people, and as of yet, there are no vaccines or drugs available, although they're in production and all that, but in any ways, the virus that causes the disease. However, they say that human convalescent serum is an option to prevent and treat COVID-19. They say that it could be available in a short timescale as long as enough people who had recovered from it could donate their blood. And so through blood donations from people who have recovered from this, we may be able to go through and, spread the immunity at a much faster rate. So those are things that are nice, good, and interesting. Okay, so kind of going over here and talking a little bit more about the social issues. Remember on yesterday's episode, I talked about how Republicans were proven right about in a time of emergency. The reason why the Second Amendment is so important is because you can't count on the government to be able to protect you during a crisis. And part of that is because of crisis management, where they're going to be spread thin and they got to prioritize, what they think is important, to try and deal with what fire is more important. And so there's a lot of things that they won't be able to, do to come to your aid and rescue and, be able to protect you. And this is why the Second Amendment is so important. Well, there are certainly areas of this country that are determined to prove conservatives right beyond a shadow of a doubt. So as you remember, Baltimore had issued a statement publicly on social media saying, hey, you know what? It's a free holiday for you criminals because we're not going to be policing criminal activities because we have, bigger things that we need to do. So robbery, theft, vandalism, and all of that. Hey, you got free reign. Well, now it gets even worse because not only did they announce on social media that they are not going to, the police are not going to be there to protect you from the criminals, but now they're going through and initiating this plan to say, hey, we got all these people in jail. They're going to be at risk. So now we're going to release the people who are already in jail for criminal offenses, right? We're going to release them back into society for, health concerns. And we're doing so as we have publicly announced that it's a criminal holiday, that, whatever they do after we release them, they're not going to have to suffer the consequences of because the police aren't going to, do anything to stop them. But we're just going to ask them to be nice and ask them to behave. So we're going to release people from jail, ask them to behave, while at the same time announcing, it's free reign. The police are not going to be there to protect anybody. And you wonder why we have a Second Amendment, right? You wonder why we have a Second Amendment. This is why. Because just as we said, in a time of crisis, national panic, whether that be invasion or a breakdown of society or, a tyrannical government, you're not going to, in any of those three situations, you won't be able to protect on local law or depend on local law enforcement and stuff. And they keep proving us right. They're determined to prove us right. Now, some other issues here, Lindsey Graham and Jared Kushner, you unbelievable morons, idiots. So get this piece from the Conservative Review. Graham admin officials are pushing for more visas from China during the China virus. right? And so here's the issue here. And now some, of course, on the left are going to go, you're a xenophobe. No. Let's actually analyze this, for a moment. Because it's not just about an issue that, we are dealing with a global pandemic that, started in China. But it's also, let's take a look at what's happening economically, right? And why this is bad policy. Look, a lot of businesses have been forced to close and shut down. And a lot of people are going without paychecks. And during the shutdown, as we try to stop the spread of the global pandemic, a lot of businesses now have a lot of, expenses that they still have, but they don't have, the revenue coming in because of the actions that the government has been taking. So there's potentially a lot of businesses that could go under as a result, of all of this. And as well as the economic impact of various other, things that are going on. And so, what we are looking at is a situation where some people have predicted that, we could be facing high unemployment again, ratcheting up to around as high as 20%, near the Great Depression, Great Recession levels of unemployment, with millions of Americans out of work. And it's going to take us, some time to be able to recover from the economic impact of this. And the last thing that we need during a time of high unemployment and during the time of economic struggles is to be increasing immigration. I don't care whether it's from China. I don't care whether it's from Mexico. I don't care whether it's from Canada. I don't care whether it's from the UK, from Europe. I don't care if it's from Africa. I don't care what other country it is. The last thing we need to do, as we are facing an economic crisis with the potential for massive unemployment, is to be increasing the number of immigrants. I mean, if we don't have enough jobs for the people who are already here, why would we be opening up the floodgates for more immigration, right? Don't you think the smart policy would be to slow down immigration, let us recover, let people, be able to refine jobs, be able to get people, time to reopen businesses, launch businesses, and get, the employment back under control before we start, dealing with, all this immigration, and even thinking about increasing immigration. Yes, during an economic boom, yes, going through and talking about increasing immigration, fine. But you do not, under any circumstances, want to increase immigration during times of a financial crisis, financial struggles, and job losses. When you increase immigration during job losses, you're just being a complete and total idiot, and all you're doing is proving that you don't care about the average citizen. You're just looking for the donor interest and trying to get them the cheapest possible labor, while making it harder on the average citizen to be able to find a job and be able to get back on good economic footing. Okay, where are we at here for time? Okay. Let me see here. So I just got one more story here. So as we've gone through here, yesterday I talked about how the prosecutions from the Mueller investigation and Mueller probe are completely falling apart in court case after court case. Now they got two people, tax evasion and taxing medallion issue, but the whole issue about the company in which was charged, the Russian troll farms, it is completely falling apart. We reported, yesterday from the transcripts of the case that, the government was trying to bluff. They said they had all this evidence, but it turns out they never even looked at all the evidence. They just collected a bunch of stuff. For all they know, all they did was collect a bunch of cookbooks and, just tried to bluff their way by saying, we have all this evidence. Are you sure you don't want to take a plea deal? So with all of this, why would they bring this, case? Well, there's some interesting things here. So the Russian collusion case ended in an embarrassing whimper Monday. It turned out that in the order to have the Russian collusion case, one must actually have Russians and collusions. Well, it turns out Mueller and his prosecution had neither, right? So as we found out in the Mueller report from last year, there was no collusion with President Trump. On Monday, Mueller's prosecutors admitted they're running out of Russians too. Left in the wreckage, the first 3 years of the Trump candidacy and presidency, his reputation, the erosion of confidence in American government institutions, his friends and advisors in prison on process crimes from the corrupt investigation and leftist governmental bots who planned it all, who are not in prison, the charges against 3 Russian bot farms and 13 individuals in Mueller's so-called Russia collusion case were dropped with prejudice. And when we say with prejudice, it's a legal term that says under no circumstances can you bring this case back before the courts. But the conclusion of the case was never in doubt. When the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein announced the Mueller's team's much ballyhooed charge in February of 2018, he knew, and so let's get into the analysis of this. So they never had a case. They never even had any evidence to support the charges that they were levying against these companies. So why did they do it? Because you never want to embarrass yourself by bringing a case with zero evidence. They did it because they wanted to make political headlines at the time in order to try and, give the, so that the, swamp rats can give the media a political narrative during an election year, right? In order to try and, hurt the Republicans and try and help the Democrats. But you're like, okay, but that doesn't make sense because the case would fall apart. Yes, and no. Now, first off, yes, years later, but they were hoping that they could stave it off long enough that they could just bury it. But the real answer is they never thought they would have to take this to court or prove anything. See, this was a Russian, companies. And so they never thought that the Russian company would actually bring it voluntarily, surrender themselves to the U.S. judicial system and defend themselves. They thought these companies and their executives would stay over to Russia, never answer the charge, and having no jurisdiction in Russia, they would never have to, actually try and present their case in court, so that they would be able to push out this narrative that, hey, we found these Russians, we found this bot farm, we are charging them with, crimes that they committed in trying to influence the election. And they thought they would never show up in court, they would never defend themselves, and they had no jurisdiction to force them to. So they never thought this would actually go to court. They thought they could just make the headline, make the accusation, and never have to actually prove the accusation. Well, they were shocked and, crapping their pants when they decided that they would actually answer the charge and take advantage of the legal system by going, okay, we'll go ahead and surrender to your legal system. Oh, yeah, by the way, under your legal system, as part of our right to defend ourselves, we have the ability and the right to examine the evidence against us to prepare our defense. And the government was like, no, we don't want to do that. National security, this would reveal sources and methods. And then they go off in that course case and go, and after it was revealed, we got 2 terabytes worth of information on these people, and then they asked, well, what language is that information in? Russian. Did you have it translated? No. Then how do you know what's in it? Oh. It was a complete farce of a case. And this goes on to show just how massively corrupt the left is and how they abuse power time and time again in order to try and draw a false narrative to influence the outcome of an election in their favor so that they can grab more power and institute more authoritarian control to dictate every part of your life to you. All right. The piece goes on, though. Right. The piece goes on. When Mueller brought the only case he charged that involved Russian interference in the 2016 election, remember, this was the absolute only case that had anything to do with what he was tasked with investigating. we noted that it was more theater than prosecution. It seemed like a perfect opportunity for the special counsel to try to control the narrative, an indictment asserting something that, however highly probable, would be very difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal trial, namely that the Russian regime meddled in the U.S. election. And as we go through here, countries all over the world have been meddling in our election for years. The question isn't whether or not they're meddling, it's whether or not, what they're doing is criminal in how they're meddling in the election, right? Because think about it. We have foreign countries who are legally able to have lobbyists influencing our congressmen and senators for the interest of these foreign governments, right? So it's legal for them to, get involved in the political process up to the point where they get to exert influence over our elected representatives with lobbyists, right? So, the media, so these foreign governments have been meddling, but is putting out a bunch of stuff on social media, really a criminal offense? The Mueller team never thought they would actually have to defend this, and I love this tweet. The only case Mueller brought to prove Russian interference with any defense is now being dismissed by the DOJ because prosecutors knew they couldn't win at trial. Repeat, the DOJ could not find a single case they could successfully prosecute to prove any act of Russian interference. And that's, what this all comes down to. All right. This goes and shows beyond a doubt that, the left wing, the Democrats and all that are just massively corrupt beyond belief. And that there is no government institution that they will not abuse in order to target their political opponents so that they can gain more power and control over every aspect of your life. All right, so that's it for this episode. There was, another article, but taking a look at the time, I'm already over, by quite a bit, and so I know the clock ran out, a little bit ago, and taking a look at this, I got to try and, actually stick to the clock, going forward. So I'm not going to cover this last article, to make sure that you never miss an episode. Go ahead and make sure to go to wherever it is you download and listen to podcasts. Find the Jacob Johnston Show, and go ahead and download and listen to the audio version of the show. Go ahead, listening or watching on the YouTube channel or BitChute or whatever video platform you are watching this on. Go ahead and share this with people. Share this around social media. The best way to counteract left-wing fake news propaganda crap is to make sure that we get all good information or just good opinion analysis with reasoned opinions circulating throughout the internet, right? Let's go through and make sure we drown out the propaganda. But remember, this is an opinion show. I'm just analyzing everything that's going on and then trying to break it down with what my opinions and viewpoints are and why I believe what I believe. All right? I'm not a journalist. I'm an opinion guy. Let's make sure that's clear. So go ahead, share this around. Don't forget to subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, starting to get to the point where I can't speak. But, and I don't edit out mistakes. I want to make sure that you know that I'm genuine and authentic. But don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified every time a new episode drops. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and I'll be back again soon.